Um, we officially scheduled out the rest of season 2. We'll have weekly episodes until mid-April, at which point we will have concluded covering all of these settings. And I think after that, we'll be getting into browser hardening, which I think is a pretty hot topic for a lot of MSPs today. Wanting to contain where all your SaaS apps are hosted is probably a pretty good idea. A little bit more to securing your browser than just making sure they can't save a password there. So we'll get into that later this year. Looking forward to, I guess, season 3, we could call it. But today we're back with the Windows Workstation server settings, and we're going to be talking about some of the app privileges and biometrics. And we have our special guest, Dan Lee, his first day back in office and joining us to kick off our season. So really thankful to have you here, Dan. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Zach.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this, but I think the last time you were on was our most viewed episode on YouTube. So I mean, the bar is set high having you on here, Dan.
Oh, amazing. I did not know that.
So Dan, I got to meet Dan at RSA last year. We've become very close since, and you are probably one of the most mature security minded MSPs I've met. And that's primarily, you of course done your studying, prioritized the right things, but you also are using a lot of enterprise grade solutions and bringing them to the MSP market in your stack. But I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit, but give yourself a plug. Who's Dan? Who's Red Cup? Tell us about you.
Thanks, Zach. So yeah, the Red Cup IT is an enterprise grade MSP. We do bring enterprise grade tools, solutions, and the whole tech stack that's already pre-integrated, tested, vetted in real life to SMEs that are regulated in the financial services space, in the healthcare space, and B2B SaaS companies like even Senteon as well, or companies like Asana, Monday. Those companies all run workloads inside AWS, GCP, Azure, and those needs DevOps security. So you want to make sure that not only are your identities secure, but also the endpoints connecting to those cloud
Mhm.
systems as well. So we're
Yeah,
handling
and
a lot of it.
identity is something you've talked to us so much about. I mean, how critical is it making sure the right identity is used on your systems?
That I think that identity is the linchpin. So if someone can assume your identity, then they have all of your tokens, your passwords, your access, your permissions, things like that. So you have to make sure that you're hardening every touch point to make sure that your network is secure, your endpoint secure, your users are secure, and so that when your identity is traversing these networks and endpoints, then it's also secure as well.
Make sure everything is who you say are, and make sure it's the right thing. And one other thing you noted in that introduction, Dan, was this concept of integration. I talk to a ton of MSPs, and they always ask me, hey, how does Senteon fit into my stack? How does it communicate to the other platforms, right? And today we're talking about security configuration hardening. So, talking about the importance of integration as a whole, but if you could also go a little bit deeper as to why integrating security configurations and baselines into that matter.
I think integrating baselines into security configurations matter because there are a lot of settings across different systems. So on, let's say, just your Windows computer, you have the Windows operating system, then you have applications that also have configurations such as 365 desktop. And then let's say you're using Teams, there's a Teams client,
Yep.
but also a web client. And then there's DNS domains. There has to be a way that this data knows that it has to go to your company and then the other companies you're working with. So there's allow listing. That's another configuration. So that's
Yep.
network level configuration at the SaaS app level, but you can also block that using a SASE or VPN or a firewall as well on the computer level and at the EDR level, like a Sentinel one also has a firewall. Then the a VPN also has its own firewall, or if you're in a physical office with the firewall, there's a firewall there too. So there's just so many firewalls everywhere and they all have configurations. So you do need to manage these configuration baselines per system so that they work together. When
Yep.
something doesn't work together, then the customers have a bad experience. Your end users will start complaining and you'll get a lot of pushback.
Yep. And you just listed, I mean, I listed at the start of this just on an OS, there's hundreds of settings. You went into the application layer, how there's hundreds and hundreds of more settings depending on what's on the system. This is a lot of work. I mean, I only work with MSPs and there's not a lot of bandwidth. They're always a lot of time drinking out of a fire hose, right? So Could you tell us how you handle that, and if automation plays a role in any of this?
Yeah, so what we've done in the past is hire a lot of people, make sure that they know what they're doing, quality control their work, and have them build systems that work and have them test over and over and over again, build out edge cases, listen to the customers, talk to customers. And it still doesn't scale because it's still based on people, process, technology. What you need is a people, process, technology put into a piece of software that does what you need it to do, which is a continuously maintained capability. So for example, for Windows hardening, we've picked Senteon as our vendor for that, since
Appreciate it.
that's all that's all their team does is Windows configuration for now, and maybe in the future browser configuration, which is something we also manage across Chrome browsers and Edge browsers using Intune and
Yep.
Chrome Enterprise licensing. So it's expensive to even get the licensing to manage it, and then you have to do that across multiple customers. Whenever we onboard a customer, we have to import or manually configure the browser settings again, or manually configure certain things again. So it's just a lot of work. Even with all the automation we have, the templating and everything, it's still hours and hours of work. It used to be days and weeks, but now it's hours. But imagine if we're hyperscaling and adding a lot of clients on, those hours will become days and weeks again. So you need a combination of automation and vendors that are doing what you need.
Yep, I love that, and thanks for the shout out on Senteon. I mean, you've been an incredible partner of ours and really guiding the roadmap. But I would love to dive even deeper into that, because you are one of the few MSPs I talked to who was manually attacking OS hardening, browser hardening. You know, that manual operation that you took on, and for transparency to those in the audience who aren't aware, this is just to harden a Windows workstation is a 1,500 page PDF from CIS, and I think it was you even asked your team to possibly look through that 1,500 page PDF at one point. You thought you could ask them to read it. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So we only hire someone if they're willing to read this
Hmm.
manual, learn all the different nuances, configurations, and then jump into our lab environment that we've built. And we have to ship an engineer multiple computers that are
Yep.
also running VMs on top of that. So they have a a Windows computer, a Mac OS computer, and then they're running VMs on both just to get all the stuff working. So it's a lot of work, and it doesn't scale. So software
Yep.
scales, people and hardware don't.
Exactly. And I mean, let's say he did get through reading all of that. I mean, after he reads through it, and you just said it with your test environment, he then has to understand how to implement, create the scripts, utilize Intune, group policy, whatever that is. But I mean, you said it. That's a multi-month long process. Could even go into a year if you do all 500 recommendations, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So,
we ended up downloading the DoD STIGs
yep.
and pushed that out, and that covered a lot of the baseline. However, there were still gaps when we ran other tools like Connect Secure, for example, to look at, hey, what's still missing in CIS IG1? There's still a lot of
Yep.
gaps, and we would have to go back into Intune and turn more things on, and then test it on real users, and then wait for feedback, and it's a lot of continuous work.
Yep. And you mentioned the word template quite a few times in that. And this is something that Senteon is really trying to move the market away from. Like, yes, if you do all 500 CIS configurations and just apply the template, you're done. But what's your experience of working with template? Just apply all easy button. Do things break? Is it as easy as just putting a template on, or is there a lot more to it than just click and go with a template?
There's a lot more to it actually. So you have to understand the context of the environment that you're applying these settings to. So is it a healthcare company that is all cloud, or is it a a medical lab that has on-prem devices? Do they have another vendor installing a more traditional piece of software that runs on a desktop or a server?
Hmm.
If you turn off some settings using a template, it can break that software. So really, it's about the context. Or is this a company that's all browser based? So then you
Yep.
can really turn everything on, and they do 99% of their work in the browser. Then sure, you can turn off all the Windows features that they don't use anyways, but are security vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate that and diving into the configs, but it's 2024. We got a new year. I just want to kind of kick off with some general high level topics. I know in our little banter before this, you talked about, you're prepping for some audits right now, but overall, Dan, 2024, what are some of your top security goals?
Our top security goal right now is to work on correlating all the data from all the different SaaS applications that we already use and making sure that everything funnels into one place, and then we're segmenting the data by client and then sending it to our SOC partners so that they can look at the data. However, there's so many apps that a lot of
Yeah.
these 24/7 SOC providers don't even know how to, know what that app is. There's no context, so we need to start building our own security team. So I made my first security analyst slash security engineer hire last year, at the end of last year, and we're working on training and onboarding her right now so that we have a
And
dedicated person that's all they're going to do is look at these types of alerts and help and work with the SOC team.
that's one thing that's really interesting about you, and you've proven that through our partnership, is you get very close to your vendors and really work hand in hand with them to make sure, they work for you, right? What kind of, I guess, advice would you give MSPs who maybe don't have a lot of correspondence with their vendors? Why should you, why do you prioritize it so much?
Well, they're all of your sub processors, so this job you can't do alone. You have to do it together, and all of our we all have different types of customers with different scenarios, use cases, and let's say Senteon may work for us, but it may not work for
Sure.
another type of vertical yet. Maybe it's construction, let's say. So you need to, as an MSP, your job is to get the data from the customer about their specific business needs, see if it'll fit with your vendors, with your multiple vendors, and that's just a lot of conversations, emails, collaboration, feature requests. So
Yeah.
if you don't already talk to your channel managers, I would highly recommend doing that. That's just a starting point, and then next level is getting in calls with the engineers as well, and getting going in deep and trying to build together is what will work. Just expecting things to work out of the box is not realistic.
I love that. I think that's great advice. And let's get into some of the hotter, trendier topics, Dan. I mean, everyone's talking about LLMs and AI. Speaking now to, I guess, your customer base and MSPs who maybe want to start having this conversation with their customers. Is this something you're talking about? Is this something you're getting asked about? What Give us a little bit of intro of how you work with LLMs and AI when your customer brings it up or whatnot.
Yeah, so definitely you want, we're technology companies and we're technologists, so we need to start using that and be ahead of the curve. So make sure that you're doing this before your customers ask. So when a new technology comes that's more general, that across that can be used across all businesses, then you should use that for your own company as well. And make sure that your user adoption rate is faster than your customers. That way you're not caught, not caught unready to answer questions
Sure.
when they have them. Then they'll just go somewhere else and they'll get the questions answered elsewhere. And that's your stickiness will decrease over time if you don't stay ahead of the curve.
I love that you said that because that's what I was thinking when you were bringing it up. It's like, this new technology comes out. We're all technologists. We love it. But if if when I went home for Christmas, right, I'd ask my sister-in-law or something like, "Hey, have you heard of ChatGPT?" She'd be like, "I've heard about it. Not a clue what it does." Right? Like the people in our bubble is very, we're up to date on a lot of these things. We know what it is, and the rest of the greater, I guess, population, right? The rest of the US, right, knows of the word, but not actually what it is. So you leverage new technology trends to really build that, what is it, the consultant relationship, that partnership to maintain the stickiness. Is that how you're utilizing that?
Yeah, that's right. So we want customers to come to us about anything related to business or technology. If they have a cyber liability renewal that's coming across that, now we're looped into that too because cyber insurance is getting harder and harder to acquire and maintain over the years as there are more and more mounting cyber attacks. They're
Mhm.
losing more and more money, so they don't want to basically insure you if you don't
Sure.
have a whole cybersecurity tech stack in your company.
Yeah.
And then are you going to go hire 5, 10 people to run that for you, or do you want to work with a company that has already done it for multiple other companies and they know what they're doing? They're already partnering with insurance companies, so it's
Yep.
better to go MSP route than hire in house.
And,
Well,
and your and your customers all like they're receptive to this type of talk. You're not coming at them with a new line item. You're not coming at them with, something to buy. You're just coming with them for general knowledge and education sharing. Like they're receptive. You believe that's helped your relationship?
definitely, yeah, a
That's
lot.
awesome to hear. I don't hear a lot of MSPs doing that proactive approach of relationship in my conversation. So just wanted to kind of get that out there and really highlight possibly what makes you guys special right there.
Yeah, something
Um,
what we do is, weekly calls with our customers, so we instead of having waiting for a QBR, we're talking on the f on a z on the phone or Zoom weekly with our customers, and then we have shared Slack channels as well, so they get real-time support all the time.
That's awesome. I mean, that's extremely cool to hear. The other thing I constantly hear MSPs talk about is, oh my gosh, my client, I just found out they have this new software, right? They got a new app and they didn't tell me about it, and it's now a risk that I didn't wasn't aware about. You know, and I feel like this is a challenge across the board. If an MSP has 50 clients, 100 clients, it's hard to know when just one employee of one of those clients installs a software without permission, right? How do you go about addressing new software? Do your customers know to come to you first? Is this something you proactively have to figure out? What does this look like?
Yeah, so in a mature IT organization, you would have a form where someone would log into the portal and fill out a form like, "Hey, I want this new software, or I want to test a new SaaS software, and I'm going to make a login." Um, so make a form, make it easy for them
Sure.
to sign in, and then if there's not a form, then they can just reactively email you or send a ticket in and request it, or if they just do it, then that means you're not configuring the system to block them or to quote unquote funnel them,
Yep.
down. You need to funnel. It's like herding cattle or cats. So basically, you need to create the funnel so these requests are going to happen no matter what. So if you don't manage it, then it comes in unmanaged. If you manage it, then it comes in through the path that you determine in advance.
Now, it sounds like in your example how you work with clients, you're creating this process for them. You're kind of educating them on the process they have to go through. I think a lot of MSPs may say like, I'm not that hand in hand. I can't implement a process and expect them to follow it. But you've found through relationship building, putting the right processes in place, they are utilized pretty well.
Yeah, I think so. And we're also picking the customers that have regulations built in. So
Sure.
there's external parties asking them to do these certain things like have change management, have their own ticketing system, have a onboarding, offboarding process for their new hires. So when you have that, then you you have to create forms, you have to create workflows and processes so that they can use that. And why let your customers do all the work from scratch when you already have known working processes from your other customers or from your own in-house experience as well.
That's
Or you
awesome.
can look at the marketplace and see what's out there.
Yep. And I know you mentioned you're going through an audit right now for yourself. I think you said ISO 27001. I think you're doing a SOC 2 renewal. But I'm curious if you work in this regulated space, and when your clients go through these audits, do they come to you for help in preparing the audit forms? What's the relationship between you and a client going through an audit?
So basically the auditor will ask the customer like, "Hey, here's a list of 150 questions you need to answer. And if you don't have a system like a GRC platform, then there's a lot of spreadsheets going back and forth. There's a lot of calls, emails to get that information.
Sure.
And then from there, that's delegated to us as the network engineers or security engineers. We have to go and answer questions on behalf of the client because it's us managing the system, not them. And that's a shared responsibility that they're delegating from their organization to our organization and then our team. So we have to answer these questions for them as if we are the client.
Wow. So it
It's a
really
great,
is hand in hand. They'll come to you. You're looking at the forms in real time with them.
exactly.
It's awesome to
And
hear.
we're trying to build a system so that we can consistently answer the questions across different types of customers. It's really the same questions, right? Do you have backup? Do you have EDR? Are you testing your backups? Things like that. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, that's required.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I mean, you're exclusively focusing on this regulated space. Do you mind, I guess, given the background, how did you come to that decision? And are you even turning down business when they're out of your scope? Is that
Yeah, we definitely are. So
I
if
don't
they're
feel
not,
like a lot of MSPs are willing to always turn down business. So again, you're one of the more mature security minded. I was kind of curious if you do that.
yeah, all the regulations and cybersecurity software and people and process, it comes with a cost. And if the business is not willing to invest in that, or if they're not required to invest in that, then they're not going to be able to create a budget for that and pay for all of this ongoing cost and maintenance. So basically, you need to keep up with it, and we're building for something specific, and I think the market is catching up, and with
Mhm.
one of our customers got a non-renewal. Um, uh, well, I can't remember what it's called, but basically it says if you don't do these things, we're not going to renew your policy. Luckily, the customer emails us, kind of stressed out about it, but we
Sure.
basically said, "Hey, don't worry, our tech stack is already doing all of these things that the insurance is asking for." So then that's when the customer is relieved, and then maybe there wasn't that much buy-in in the beginning where they don't understand like why do we have to install the software in your computer, and then why do we try to get people to move from BYOD to company-owned computers because it is more
Sure.
invasive. You
Yep.
install so many different agents on your computer, and we have to encourage the owners of the company to then encourage their employees to not do personal activities on their company computers because that data is being shipped elsewhere to trusted partners and trusted vendors, but still the data is going there, and they all have different data retention policies. So it's best to just not to create the data by only doing work on a work computer.
Yep.
However, if you don't do that, then your cyber insurance policy might go from 8,000 to 10,000 a year or 16,000 a year, or they just won't cover you. And then when you have a breach that costs 6 figures or 7 figures, you'll just close your company down or
That's the solution, right? You just close the doors.
close the door, start
No,
over.
that's amazing. And just a follow up question on that before we kind of segue to this security configuration. Um, this, and I'm going to assume it was like cyber insurance policy, whatnot, asked for those three things. Customer had that minor panic, and then came to you, and you were already doing it. So two things. How did you, I guess, prepare Red Cup to be ahead of what these insurers are asking for, right? How are you doing these proactive things that maybe aren't mandated yet so that when the customer does come to you in a panic, they're already being done? How do you stay ahead?
Well, we can look to frameworks like CIS and NIST, right?
There we go.
That's everyone in the whole business world and security world leverages to basically build these policies. And the cyber insurance companies they're insurance companies. They don't know security. They don't know IT. That or well, if they do know it, it's not their core.
Sure.
And so they would look to frameworks like NIST or CIS to build their own controls off of and their own flavor of risk management, right? So it's going off of somewhere. They're not reinventing the wheel. They're just going to look at CIS. So that's exactly what we did. We started putting in CIS years ago into our computers internally, starting to turn on controls,
Yep.
forcing things to be off on purpose and breaking things on purpose and breaking workflows on purpose so that our engineers can experience it firsthand. What is it like to work on a managed computer versus an unmanaged computer? Or what is it like to work in a managed network versus an unmanaged network? You can't just go sign up for Canva. You can't just go sign up for Restream or LinkedIn or
Yep.
whatever, right? Because it's blocked or the domain's not allowed or it's not allow list is not trusted yet. So, you won't know these things unless you intended to manage it from the first place. So, in terms of managed services, everything is a service. It's
Hmm.
SaaS is a service. Applications are a service. Even hiring staff, they're providing a service to the company. So, you have to manage all of it and you have to think about all of it.
I feel like that's eat your own dog food to the next level, because
Exactly.
a lot of the time it's like, hey, roll Senteon out internally, see what it's like with a hardened environment. But you're talking about completely across the board, and you're intentionally letting them see the differences. Like, eat your own dog food to the next level, Dan. I think that's great. And to wrap up just this before we dive into the settings, again, you're one of the most mature enterprise grade solutions at your MSP for your security stack, right? Working in highly regulated. So again, you're top of the mind security for me. And you still mentioned that you follow CIS. That's crazy. You didn't follow CIS because Senteon came to you with a sales proposition, right? You already knew about it. You already followed it internally to the best you could. Like, what would you say to MSPs who maybe don't follow a framework today, or maybe don't even know what CIS is? How important is that at a mature MSP like yourself?
It's actually very important. One of our customers sent me a private message the other day asking, like, "Hey, is it normal that an IT company follows a framework?" And I actually said, "It's actually not normal, and many IT providers are not that mature."
Yeah.
So, their customers and their vendors are looking to our customer, I mean, to
Hmm.
have those controls in place. So then in turn, our customer looks to us as well. And if we're not mature enough for them, then they will just pick another provider that's a better fit. And that's why we went straight towards the hardest thing possible. We wanted to solve for the hardest thing possible is to buy us time to be stickier in the market, and then just already be ready. And I don't want to be not ready for new regulations. There's only going to be more attacks and more regulations over time and more complexity. So why not just go straight towards head first into what's already going to happen? It's not going to happen.
Writing was on the wall, and you definitely took advantage of it. And I hope for a fruitful year 2024 for you, man.
Thank you.
And I guess again, I keep saying final question, but you give such good answers. I have more to ask.
Sure.
um, a lot of time, and maybe it's different in regulated spaces. So, if this is a bad question, just let me know. But from what I hear in the MSP market, the end client or at a prospect at this point will never ask the question, do you follow a framework? Right. So I'm curious, do you bring up yourself that you follow a framework? Do you mention the words CIS to the end client or prospect at that time? How much do they know?
So actually, we have a spreadsheet that maps SOC 2 to CIS controls, and then those map to our tech stack and our processes, and then we actually transparently share that with our customers right now. And the our CIO counterparts or CTOs are actually taking that spreadsheet and they're sharing it with their internal management team, the C levels, the boards, to let them know like, hey, we're retaining this provider, but here's what the provider is doing.
I love that.
That, justifies the cost, justifies the effort, justifies the investment overall, and
Mhm.
changing and investing in change as well. So it's a whole mindset shift. So the more transparent we are, I think that it'll help with, and we win, our customers win, and then it's in regulated spaces. That's typically more mature companies, and so they have
Sure.
a board, they have management that needs to buy in as well. So it's not just us selling to a business owner; it's us selling to a whole group of owners or decision makers. So the transparency is better is good for us.
I love
Hopefully
that.
that answers your question.
It does. It does. So awesome to hear. And let's go ahead and dive into the second half of the show where we actually call out some of these CIS recommendations and the topics we'll be going over. So we can have that pop up on screen. We'll get into it.
All right, sounds good.
Moderator in the background. Okay, well, moderator is taking their time on this one. There we go. All right, so let's go into the MITRE ATT&CK slide. And I just want to I love to emphasize CIS and how they're reducing the risk of successful cyber attacks. So I just listed out, 4 examples of some of these MITRE techniques. And I was just curious if you could kind of call out a couple about why it's important to mitigate the risk of this, and if applicable, call out, the CIS recommendations for it. So talking with unauthorized access prevention, I mean, that makes sense. You don't want anyone who's not allowed on the network, but I guess talk to us about how you mitigate the risk of that.
So basically, you'd want to use a directory of known users and service accounts on a computer, and you want to limit, what kind of users and identities can access applications on your Windows device, and that's something that you have to do via group policy or registry key.
Sure.
And so if you don't manage that, then new untrusted identities can also do the same actions as your trusted identities. So that's, again, back to intent. You have to understand and design the system to operate in a way that is approved versus just allowing whatever to happen.
And that's very similar to the other one on this spoofing and impersonation protection, right? Is that similar, those two types of things we're talking about?
So it's, yeah, I think spoofing means that you're assuming an identity,
Hmm.
or you're creating an account that looks and acts like an existing identity, so that you're trying to trick, the system, or trick the end user or the security person looking at the logs to pretend to be, you know, the same identity that is allowed to do certain things like install a piece of software or execute a PowerShell. So spoofing, spoofing protection is very important
Yep.
because you don't want these fake identities to do uh, real actions on your environment.
Awesome. And yeah, and the other ones on here, right? These are all just types of attack techniques that by having a hardened environment, you're mitigating the risk of. And the settings we're going to be transitioning here into a moment are going to be able to reduce the risk of these successfully happening on your environment. So, is there anything else you want to talk about on this slide here, Dan?
Yeah, I think application isolation and sandbox bypass
Sure.
prevention is important when you have different Windows apps from the Windows App Store or locally installed apps that are
Um,
directly installed or deployed by either the IT, the user, or the MSP. You want to make sure that the data is staying put where it's supposed to be and it's not being exfiltrated or accidentally shared between different applications. So I think turning that setting on is important for data privacy and data security.
yeah. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and transition into I guess the topic of today, CIS. So I'm going to pull up my own screen here and just kind of give a high level overview of what we're looking at. So this is the Senteon catalog we're glancing at here. And what CIS and Senteon both provide is actually a list of all these settings. And CIS is able to provide the click in information of that description, the rationale, and impact. And a lot of times the feedback I get from this is incredibly useful information, but I don't understand the risk that is actually mitigated. So that's why we do these weekly episodes with Dan, right? Today we're going to be talking about a lot of these Windows apps, autoplay settings I know we'll be getting into, right? And like Dan talked about, he maps his CIS controls over to SOC 2, right? So CIS makes that very easy because they are known standards and they already did the hard work for you. So feel free to, of course, use this own table, right? You can add in the SOC 2 mappings and you can see the blanks where they don't have overlap, but then you get to see which ones do have overlap. So that's what Dan was talking about when he was talking about those cross mappings. And better than that, if you don't know what something means, we talked about this, but if you don't know why it cross maps, you can also, CIS also provides the context as to why it is a cross mapping, right? So extremely valuable resource. Again, this is completely free. I'll drop the link into the chat at the end of the webinar, but this is completely free. We give this away. CIS gives it away. So absolutely a good resource to have. So, all right, that's my plug for the day, Dan. You ready to start doing some educating? Awesome. So let's go into this first setting. And to emphasize again, all of these settings are all of the settings we talk about are just recommendations. They may not be right for you. You do need to test these, make sure they're right for your environment, or take on a solution like Senteon that's going to do that for you. So let's hit this first one up. So allow a Windows app to share application data between users. CIS does recommend to disable this. Why would we not want separate users to be able to communicate with each other, Dan?
So let's use a lab environment as an example. So if you have
Sure.
a lab that's doing genetic testing, for example, for one user account, and let's say the IT person comes in and wants to work on the computer, that separation of duties, the person that's working on the computer normally needs to see that genetic data, but then the person that will come in later, maybe over the weekend or nighttime to run some maintenance or fix something on the computer or update the software, they don't need to see that data. So just because you have two or three or more users on the same device doesn't mean that they should be allowed to see the data. And so this is where between apps you want to create the same type of
Mhm.
perimeter as well
Yep.
to prevent any leakage.
And you don't want that data to get mixed together, right? Because you don't know who's going to be going on the machine yet next, who's going to be opening that application. Because there is very likely, I mean, the example you gave is pretty extreme, but genetic information, right? Could be something much less critical as that, but it's still data that should not be exposed to other users just because they opened an application, right?
Could also be HR data, financial data,
Yeah.
things like that.
I think that's very relatable to the greater audience. But for those of us in the genetic field, especially you, so no, I think that's spot on, Dan. So we're making sure with this setting that there is no leakage between different users. All right, let's go over to this next one. Prevent non-admin users from installing packaged Windows apps, and we're making sure this is enabled. So a big thing we talk about on this series is always with user rights assignments. This sounds like user right assignment adjacent, almost just kind of really locking down what users can and cannot do. But talk to us about this. Why do we want to make sure non-admin users are not able to do this?
So basically, you want to have a controlled environment that with known variables, you have an asset, which is a computer, and then you have software assets in there that you want to know all about all of those pieces of software. So you want to limit change as much as possible unless it's necessary. So if there's no business use case, for example, for a Netflix streaming app, then
Sure.
let's not allow it by default by allowing non-admin users to push apps. And maybe someone says, "Hey, I don't like the VPN that you deployed to me. I'm going to go test on my own, like ExpressVPN or NordVPN." If you don't block them, they're just going to start installing more stuff on the computer because they can. There's no
And
guardrail in place, and so there's change management would be non-existent at that point.
yep,
And then you're
and I
taking
love that you
form.
said guardrails, because that's what we think of these CIS recommendations, right? They're the guardrails to your environment, making sure users, admins only have the rights that they're critically needed for their role. And you talked about this at the beginning with new software delivery, Dan. You know, if you have this setting in place, you don't have to worry about the greater users installing Windows apps, right? You only have the smaller segment of the admins having the possibility. So now you only have, a handful of throats to choke rather than the entire enterprise. Is that the right way of thinking about this?
Exactly right. Yes.
Cool. All right, let's go into this next setting here. Let Windows apps activate with voice while the system is locked. So again, this is where we're talking about the screen is already locked. No one's logged in, which is absolutely insane because that means by default, this is allowed, right? These settings that we're talking about today by default are 90% of the time already allowed to happen. So CIS does say to make sure this is enabled with force deny. So Dan, speak the obvious. Why would we not want a locked machine listening to us?
So if it doesn't, if the software is not complicated or advanced enough to learn your specific voice, like for example on Siri, it's trained to your voice. So when I try, let's say use Zach's iPhone and I'm sitting next to him at a conference and I say, hey Siri, unlock, or hey Siri something, now I'm triggered my Siri, but it won't trigger yours even on this webinar. But on a Windows device, we don't know how that operates. So possibly if I walked over to Zach's computer, I can unlock his computer and then have full access to his files, his data, his permissions, not only to the computer, but to the SaaS applications and possibly his password vault as well. Maybe it's still within that 5 minute, 15-minute period where
Yep.
it's not locked. And now I have all of his secrets for AWS and things like that.
Yep.
So
That's
definitely, you know, turn this on. And these are consumer features that are great for a personal computer, not that great for in a business environment. So it's the context of a business. You don't really need this.
yeah. And I mean, just to be devil's advocate here, a lot of businesses are moving to remote, right? They'll have their business machine remote. I mean, even if you're a remote employee, is this a risk that a business should accept and just say, "Hey, I know you really like doing this. Since you're remote, we'll let you do it." Like, is that an acceptable use case, or is this zero questions asked? You have to follow this. This is company policy.
Well, I was just traveling, right? So I spent a lot of time at the airport or in lounges and things like that. And people, one, already don't lock their computers in the first place, and they get up to go get a drink, use a restroom, things like that, or go talk to the gate agent, and the computer's unlocked. But let's say the computer's locked and you did the right thing, but then your IT manager or IT engineer didn't do the right thing and didn't read CIS or didn't use
Sure.
Senteon, and the setting is still enabled. So I can just walk up and say unlock computer, and then it just unlocks, and I have everything again. So maybe we should. This is the next thing that I think Matt Lee or
Yep.
someone.
I was going to ask you if you were taking photos of all those unlocked machines.
Exactly. This is the next thing is walk around and just say the unlock command, and maybe this will go viral on social media.
That would be absolutely terrifying if it was that easy. But yes, that is a very real example and absolutely something that should not be accepted. Because even if that computer is remote, chances are you take that laptop with you to the Starbucks, to the airport, right? Just it's not a risk worth accepting. So
Exactly.
spot on. All right. This next setting here, allow Microsoft accounts to be optional, is set to enabled. So this is saying Microsoft accounts are allowed to be optional. So why would we want that? I thought we wanted everything within just Microsoft, right?
So now you have Microsoft Entra ID, which are corporate and work accounts, and that's not the same as a Microsoft.com or
Okay.
what used to be called Live.com or Hotmail.com account. Those are personal Microsoft accounts. And so in a business context, you don't really need this to be on and enabled. So you do want to set it to be optional.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. And I mean, we were talking about Microsoft before this. They have so many new things. I think it's hard to keep up with everything that Microsoft is releasing.
Yeah, so for example, Microsoft Copilot, let's say you
Mhm.
allowed someone to sign in with their personal live account. Now they're using Copilot on the live account or maybe the work account. Then the data from your company starts kind of moving over to this personal account, inadvertently, and now it's over there, and they leave the company and they still have your company data because it's in their personal live account. So
Yep,
let's
spot
just
on.
turn it off.
Yep. All right, this next setting here is actually going to be an L2 setting. So again, just for those of us joining who are not familiar with CIS or the CIS benchmarks, these are all well, we're talking about the GPOs, but they do have CIS benchmarks for non-Windows machines. And they break them up into level 1, level 2, and next generation settings. So level 1 is what they recommend everyone to do, which is what we've been talking about so far. But this setting here is actually going into the level 2 section. So it may be a little bit more disruptive. May want to be a little bit, do extra testing with this, but still is a good security best practice. So the setting here, block launching universal Windows apps with Windows Runtime API access from hosted content is set to enabled. Dan, do you have, I know this is L2, but do you have anything you could add to this setting and explain what it is?
Yeah, I think it's important to control the sources and permissions of apps. So make sure that any apps that have API access that can impact your system operations are being controlled. And so you do want to block universal Windows apps from, having API access to your critical system functionalities, like your
Yep.
system 32 folder or any of the processes running in there. Because if you allow that to happen, they can try to modify it, inject ransomware, and inject malware into your environment from a Windows app.
Yep. And these apps may need that access to even function. That's why this is considered that level 2. It's because you may actually break a workflow, break an application if you have this setting hardened. So that's a perfect overview of that. All right, let's get into some of my favorite settings. The next three here are all going to be about autoplay and auto run settings. The first one here, disallow autoplay for non-volume devices is set to enabled. Talk to us about autoplay. What is that, Dan?
So autoplay is a feature where you can plug in a USB drive or put a CD-ROM in if you're still using that, and automatically plays or executes the files that are on that USB flash drive. And the reason why you don't want that to happen is, you don't want code or malicious software executing on your computer as soon as you plug something in. And so disabling autoplay is a good idea.
Yep. Spot on. And definitely, and it's interesting that this one comes first in CIS because you'll see here in a couple more settings, the setting is turn off autoplay. And this one specifically calls out disallow autoplay for non-volume devices. So again, a lot of these settings go hand in hand, and it's extremely important. If you want autoplay off, make sure you do all of the settings associated with autoplay. Right. So let's go into this next one. Set the default behavior for auto run. Again, this is CIS recommending to enable, which means do not execute any auto run commands. Is this similar to what you just introduced with auto play, Dan? What is auto run different?
So auto run is a little bit different. It's an auto run of like a command that's
Okay.
on the computer, and it's important to mitigate risks associated with the automatic execution of potentially malicious software or untrusted commands from external media. Because again, it's just because you're not allowing autoplay doesn't mean that auto run can't also work as well. So those are two different things, and that nuance is where CIS it's a collective of people that
Yes.
spend time looking at every single control. So if you actually read the 1500 page PDF manual, the names of all these people are on the controls as well at the bottom or at the beginning, and then they're referenced at the back in the glossary or the appendix as well. So there's a lot of people working on these settings. They're actually spinning up VMs. They're testing all this for you. So not you should still do your own testing as well. Um, but they're doing the bulk of the work, and they understand that autoplay and auto run are not the same thing. When in our MSP environment, we're always faced with clients and sales needs and employee issues and all sorts of things, right? So as an MSP owner, you're under a lot of pressure, and so you get tired, and it's easy to conflate, or even for your engineers, they get exhausted with so many tickets, and it's easy to conflate auto run and auto play being the same thing, and then you just turn on one setting but forget the other. So
Yep.
leverage software and leverage these resources like CIS.
take advantage of the work that's already been done for you. And to elaborate a little bit more on that, I mean, there's on these GPOs, on these recommendations, there's not just enabled or disabled on all of them. There's, a single GPO could have 6, 7 different options, and they already went through that for you, determined the one that was the most secure. So now, instead of setting those 6 or 7 per setting, you only have to test the one. And if it breaks something, then okay, then you have to do some additional troubleshooting, right? But the lift of it is done. I don't necessarily recommend reading all 1,500 pages. That could just take you away from all the project work and all the revenue generating items, but you do need to either outsource or find an engineer who wants to read all those pages like Dan tried to do. And maybe you can get lucky and build it in house. So thanks for the shout out on CIS there. I always need to give them
No
credit for
problem.
all of this. All right. And the last setting here, as I hinted at, was coming. Turn off autoplay again. Dan, anything else you want to add on the concept of autoplay?
Yeah, so this is autoplay for all drives, including the C drive, D drive, G drive, the internal drives that are the volume devices that were mentioned in 2 slides ago. So you really don't want autoplay to run at all. It's I think it's a bit of a legacy setting, or it's more of a consumer setting. If you have a video or something like that, or personal content that you want to autoplay when you plug something in, sure, that's fine. That's your own computer. But in a work environment, autoplay doesn't really get used often. I've been doing this for 15 years now, and I haven't really seen it be necessary. So it's good to just turn it off if it's not necessary, because hackers and malicious actors will take advantage of all these features that are good for consumers, but um, can be dangerous or risky in a business environment.
I think that's one of the myths that Senteon is slowly exposing. Yes, 500 settings on a workstation is a lot. That's not a myth. That is a fact. But what we're finding, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm making this up. The majority of our partners are getting to like 95% of these CIS recommendations in place. We're not finding that the majority of these mature MSPs have to have a ton of exceptions. It really is apply it once, make sure it doesn't drift out of compliance, continuously scan, and our tool does that for you if you need that. But realistically, all the settings we talked about today, especially those level ones, your environment too can probably handle. Dan, have you been surprised at the amount of configurations you've been able to implement?
Yeah, actually, Zach, you're the one that onboarded us and our engineers, and I had directed the engineers to just turn everything on right away and apply it to their own computers immediately, and everything works fine. So we
Oh,
have like percent coverage through Senteon, and nobody's complained so far. That's a Windows user, so it's been pretty great. But we're a remote first company, and we are mostly working out of the browser, which
yep.
itself is a customized Chromium enterprise grade browser as well. So all the things we're doing are all managed, and it's unique. But for a more traditional business, you probably will break something. So
Sure.
just try to deploy it to clone the real computer, test it on that. Don't test it on production.
And then you just said this, right? You're mostly on browser, right? You're not doing anything locally. Hey, if that's the case and you're virtual and remote, why do you care about hardening the physical OS? Why is that important to you?
So let's say somebody plugs in an external USB and the auto run executes a malicious code, and now it's key logging everything we're doing, or it's screen capturing all of our activity and sending it to a command and control server. So let's say I have a thin client or like a dumb terminal where I'm just using my computer, my personal computer, let's say, to just log into the AWS system and do some work in AWS. I wouldn't want this malicious actor to see everything I'm doing and keylog everything I'm doing, even though I'm on my own computer and I'm remoting into some other system. I'm still seeing it. If I can see it, they can see it. So that's how I think of these things. And it doesn't matter what endpoint you're on; it has to be secured, whether
Yep,
and sandbox, whether it's a company owned device or BYOD.
yep. Awesome.
And that's why these
Appreciate.
controls matter a lot.
I'm glad I asked the question. All right, we got one more setting, Dan, and we're making great time here today. So this last setting here, configure enhanced anti-spoofing is set to enabled. Is this just like, retinal scanner, facial ID? What is this enhanced anti-spoofing mean?
So basically, the enhanced anti-spoofing means that it's going to further ensure the integrity and security of biometric authentication systems, such as a fingerprint or Face ID or like a infrared scanner on a camera. And so if you don't turn the setting on, then it's not going to have the more advanced version of the biometric scanning or authentication. It's going to have a more basic version. So you do want more assurance versus less, and
Sure.
that's where it's a good recommendation to turn this on to enable.
Yep. I loved it. And that's all the settings, Dan. So thank you for being our special guest here. We do have a few more minutes, and I'd love to just kind of toss this time back to you. Where would you recommend an MSP transitioning to wanting to start offering these security processes to start? Is it just going to check out CIS? I mean, a lot. You're really a thought leader in the security space, Dan. What would you say to the majority of MSPs out there?
Try to build your own lab environment and turn everything on, see what works, what doesn't work, and experience it for yourself. I think dog fooding is the best thing you can do. It's I think a lot of pushback from clients happens due to uncertainty. So you're suggesting, hey, I want to turn on this advanced biometric authentication.
Sure.
How does that affect my user experience? And then if you don't do it yourself or your engineers don't do it themselves, then they can't answer you, you can't answer the client, then the client's not going to let you make this change. And this is only one of 500 settings. So, um,
Yep.
that's one way is testing all 500 or leveraging a partner, like Senteon, where they have good customer success. They have a great development team where it's built into the software itself, or leverage CIS, where they write explainers for every single control. So when you look at these 500 controls, then you run into a problem. It already explains this is what's going to happen when you turn it to enabled, disabled, optional, or null. There's like
Yep.
Zach mentioned, there's
Yep.
multiple options, and CIS has tested every single one. So kudos to them for sure.
Spot on. And again, I mean, any just closing thoughts you want to share, again, with your time, closing out this episode. Obviously, CIS is best practices, and thank you for being the guest here to talk about these. But time is yours. Any closing thoughts that you really want to get out there to the world?
Yeah, I think I wish there was like a configuration management database that was cloud first and could track configurations across all systems in one place. That'd be amazing if somebody could build it.
Entrepreneurs, everyone, listen up here for a business idea.
Yeah, maybe we're working on that in the future.
Oh, that's awesome. So connect with Dan. I'll try to drop some LinkedIn links into the chat. But Dan, you've been an incredible resource to us. Any other technology vendors out there, if you have something niche, reach out to Dan. He's a great coach and champion to any innovative product. So thank you for being here, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And just wrapping up here with the slides again, we are here every single week. I did not update the weekly episode guest list because, well, like everyone else, I took a break over the holidays and I forgot to update this. So really, really glad to have that. But we are here weekly. So next week's episode, and we'll have Rich back for that as well. So that'll be exciting. And then the last slide here, Senteon is a security configuration management tool. We are able to remediate, evaluate, report on, change track, all of these jazz with all the hundreds of settings we're talking about. And very soon we'll eclipse over 1,000 settings supported with browser hardening. So very exciting. And it is the freemium version is available. It is available. Scan the QR code and you'll get that. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Dan.